History, as they say, is written by the victors. It's a highlight reel of brilliant generals and epic battles that shaped the world. But if you dig around in the footnotes, you'll occasionally find a story that's less about glory and more about, well, sheer absurdity. A story so ridiculous it sounds like a practical joke. This is one of those stories. It's about the time a modern army declared war on a flock of flightless birds. No, this isn't a Monty Python sketch. This is the true story of the Great Emu War of 1932, a conflict that pitted the Australian military against an army of emus, and the emus won. In late 1932, the Australian government, armed with official decrees and leftover hardware from the Great War, actually authorized a military operation against its own national bird. Soldiers were deployed to the plains of Western Australia, equipped with Lewis machine guns, the same weapons that had defined the trenches of Europe. Their mission? To engage and neutralize a force of roughly 20,000 emus that were threatening the country's wheat supply. This is the unbelievable story of how the birds won. So, how does a country end up in a shooting war with its feathered wildlife? It all started in the years after the First World War. Australia, like many nations, had to figure out what to do with its returning soldiers. The government came up with the Soldier Settlement Scheme, which offered plots of land to veterans so they could become farmers. Thousands of ex-soldiers got parcels of land, particularly in Western Australia. On paper, it was a noble idea. Reward your heroes and boost the nation's food supply at the same time. But there was a pretty big catch. Most of this land was marginal, to say the least. It was arid, difficult to farm, and located in the rugged, unforgiving Australian outback. To make things even worse, the Great Depression hit in 1929. As global markets collapsed, so did the price of wheat. The very government that had promised subsidies to these new farmers, encouraging them to plant more, failed to deliver on that aid. Just picture it. You're a veteran of the Great War. You survived the hell of Gallipoli or the Western Front. You come home, get a patch of red dirt, and are told to make a living. You pour your blood, sweat, and what little money you have into the land, only to watch your harvest become worthless. You're broke, isolated, and losing a battle against the elements. And then the enemy arrived. Not a foreign power, but something far more relentless, something native. Following their breeding season, a vast nomadic army of emus began its annual migration toward the coast, looking for food and water. This was an instinctual journey they'd been making for thousands of years, but this time, their path led them straight into the newly established farmlands, and what they found was paradise. Irrigated fields of wheat and endless water troughs for livestock. It was an all-you-can-eat buffet. And we're not talking about a few birds here. We're talking about an estimated 20,000 emus, an enormous feathered legion descending on the wheatbelt region. Imagine waking up to see a mob of 6-foot-tall, 100-pound birds systematically eating your livelihood. They swept through fields like a plague, trampling crops, devouring grain, and leaving a path of destruction. Even worse, the rabbit-proof fences the farmers had painstakingly built were no match for them. The emus just crashed right through, leaving huge gaps that then let actual rabbits in, causing even more damage. For the struggling farmers, this was the last straw. They had faced the German army, but this was a new kind of enemy, an enemy that didn't fight, it just ate. One veteran, watching the horde descend on his farm, reportedly snarled that they moved like cavalry. These ex-soldiers felt like they were under siege, and when you're under siege, you call in the army. A deputation of farmers went to meet with the Minister of Defense, Sir George Pearce. Their logic was simple. They knew how terrifyingly effective machine guns were. If a Lewis gun could stop charging soldiers, surely it could stop a bunch of birds. Minister of Defense Sir George Pierce was in a bind. He had a group of desperate, angry veterans to deal with, a group with a lot of political pull. He also probably spotted a PR opportunity. Here was a chance to show the government taking decisive action. And maybe there was another angle too. A cinematographer from Fox Movie Tone was sent along with the troops, which suggests Pierce might have been hoping for some good propaganda footage, showcasing an efficient military in action. And so the decision was made. The Australian government was going to war with the Emus. The deal was this: the military would provide the soldiers and guns, but the state of Western Australia had to pay for transport, and the farmers had to provide food, lodging, and pay for the ammunition. It was officially called a nuisance wildlife management military operation, but the press quickly gave it a much better name: the Great Emu War. The man chosen to lead this bizarre campaign was Major G.P.W. Meredith of the Royal Australian Artillery's 7th Heavy Battery. He was a career soldier, a veteran of both the Boer War and World War I. He was put in charge of a small but well-armed force, Sergeant S. McMurray and Gunner J. O'Halloran. Their arsenal? 2 state-of-the-art Lewis machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. There was even a strange side quest. The troops were told to collect 100 emu skins, so their feathers could be used to make the iconic plumed hats for the Australian light horsemen. On paper, it seemed almost too easy. What chance did birds have against automatic weapons? The stage was set, but the emus hadn't read the script. Before a single shot was fired, the Australian military made a critical mistake. They completely underestimated their opponent. To them, an emu was just a dumb pest, a big feathered target. They failed to realize they were about to take on a species perfectly evolved to survive in the harsh Australian landscape. The emu is Australia's largest bird, standing up to 6 feet tall and weighing as much as a grown man. They can't fly, but they make up for it with legs that are biological masterpieces. Emus can hit speeds of up to 50 kilometers per hour, or 31 miles per hour, and keep it up over long distances. Those long legs, tipped with 3 massive claws, aren't just for running. A kick can be powerful enough to seriously injure a predator. But their physical abilities were only half the problem. The emus turned out to be masters of unconventional warfare. Contemporary accounts claimed that emu mobs even appeared to have leaders. Observers described a big black-plumed bird which stands fully 6 feet high that would act as a lookout. While the group fed, this sentinel would keep watch and warn the others of danger. When a threat was spotted, the flock wouldn't panic and bunch together into an easy target. Instead, they'd scatter in all directions, running in maddening zigzag patterns that made aiming a machine gun nearly impossible. They were also incredibly tough. Major Meredith himself later expressed a grudging respect for their resilience, noting they could take multiple bullet wounds and just keep running. This led him to a now famous conclusion: if we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world. They can face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks. He even compared them to Zulu warriors. This was the enemy Major Meredith was about to face: fast, smart, tough, and utterly uninterested in the rules of war. The operation was supposed to start in October 1932, but was immediately delayed by heavy rain. The downpour caused the emus to scatter over a much wider area, making them harder to find. It was a bad omen. Nature wasn't on the Army's side. Finally, on November 2nd, the conditions were right. Major Meredith and his team deployed to the Campion district, an emu hotspot. They quickly spotted a mob of about 50 birds. This was it. The soldiers set up their Lewis gun, but the emus were just out of range. So Meredith tried a classic military tactic. He had local farmers act as beaters, trying to herd the emus into a machine gun ambush. In theory, a sound plan. In reality, it was chaos. The emus, far from being a docile herd, split into small groups and scattered in every direction. The gunners sprayed bullets across the landscape, but the targets were too fast and too unpredictable. At the end of the day, only a few birds were killed. Day 1 was a total bust. A few days later, on November 4th, a much better opportunity arose. The soldiers found a local dam where over 1,000 emus had gathered to drink. This was the perfect scenario, a huge, concentrated group of targets. The machine gunners hid themselves, waited for the birds to get to point-blank range, and opened fire. The first burst cut down about a dozen emus. Victory seemed certain, and then the gun jammed. In that moment of pure, infuriating mechanical failure, the rest of the flock simply melted away into the outback. By the end of the day, only 12 birds were confirmed dead. The grand ambush was an embarrassing failure. Major Meredith was a professional, and he wasn't about to be defeated by a bunch of birds. He knew he had to adapt. Since stationary ambushes weren't working, he decided to go mobile. This led to the most famous and most ridiculous moment of the entire war. Meredith had one of the Lewis guns mounted onto the back of a truck. The plan was to chase the emus down and engage them on the move. It was an innovative, desperate, and ultimately terrible idea. The chase was on. The truck roared to life, bouncing wildly over the rough farmland as it tried to keep up. In the back, the gunner was thrown around so violently he couldn't get a single clean shot off. It was an impossible task. The emus, effortlessly reaching their top speed, zigzagged across the terrain and easily outran the clumsy vehicle. In one particularly farcical moment, the truck didn't even get close. It crashed straight through a farm fence before a shot could be fired. The soldiers were being outrun and outsmarted. Their weapons of war were useless against the emu's unique brand of guerrilla tactics. By November 8th, only 6 days in, the situation was a joke. About 2,500 rounds of ammunition had been fired for a laughably small number of kills. Estimates ranged from 50 to 500, but either way, the bullet-to-bird ratio was atrocious. As Meredith's official report noted, his men had suffered no casualties, except, he dryly added, to their dignity. While Meredith was losing the battle in the field, a second front was opening up in the cities. The Australian press had a field day with the story. Initial reports gave way to articles detailing the Army's comical failure. The media started to portray the conflict in mock-heroic terms, painting the emus as strategic geniuses and the military as bumbling fools. Headlines gleefully announced the Army's defeat. Reports described the emus as using brilliant guerrilla tactics and moving with military precision. The story eventually reached the Australian Parliament, where it became a source of national embarrassment. Opposition politicians grilled Sir George Pearce over the sheer incompetence of the campaign. One MP cheekily suggested that medals should be awarded to the emus for their bravery. Faced with public ridicule and a hopelessly ineffective campaign, Sir George Pearce had no choice. On November 8th, he ordered a full withdrawal. The First Emu War had ended in a humiliating retreat. Major Meredith and his men were recalled, leaving the victorious emus in control of the battlefield. The farmers were still angry, the government was embarrassed, and the emus were still eating the wheat.
The Army's retreat was a disaster for the farmers. The birds were still there, bolder than ever, so they begged the government for help again. Reluctantly, on November 12th, the war was back on. Major Meredith was sent back into the field, armed with the bitter experience of his earlier failure. This second attempt was slightly more successful. They ditched the big, dramatic ambushes and instead adopted a slow, grinding strategy of staking out water holes and picking birds off in small numbers. Over the next month, they slowly increased their kill count. The second campaign ended on December 10th. In his final report, Major Meredith made a very suspicious claim. He stated they had achieved 986 confirmed kills using exactly 9,860 rounds of ammo. Perfect 10 bullets per bird ratio that nobody really believed. He also claimed another 2,500 wounded birds just died later, a number that sounds completely made up to save face. Even if you believe his inflated numbers, it was a strategic failure. After firing nearly 10,000 rounds, the army had barely made a dent in the 20,000-strong emu population.
So, who really won the Great Emu War? The emus. It's not even a debate. The soldiers went home, the politicians tried to forget the whole thing, and the emus remained the undisputed victors. So what finally solved the problem? Not machine guns, but something way more boring: money and fences. The government refused all future requests for military aid and instead brought back a bounty system. They paid farmers for every emu they killed, which proved way more effective. In just 6 months, in 1934, bounties were claimed on over 57,000 emus. It turns out individual farmers with rifles were far deadlier than soldiers with machine guns. But the ultimate solution was even simpler: better fences. The government subsidized the construction of strong, reinforced exclusion fencing that the emus couldn't break through. The war was finally won not with bullets, but with better infrastructure. Today, the Great Emu War is a legendary internet meme, a go-to story for weird history that sounds totally fake. But underneath the humor is an incredible story about the resilience of nature. The very things that made the emus impossible to fight, their speed, their toughness, and their surprising intelligence, are what make them an enduring symbol of Australia. The bird that defeated the Australian army is now proudly featured on the nation's coat of arms, a permanent reminder of its victory. The conflict is a timeless parable about human arrogance. It's what happens when we assume our technology makes us masters of the natural world. The emus had no idea they were in a war. They were just surviving, and they proved to be way, way better at it than the soldiers were at fighting. The Great Emu War is one of history's most bizarre footnotes, teaching us all a valuable lesson written in the dust of Western Australia. Never pick a fight with an emu. You will lose. If you thought this story was insane, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the weirdest stories from the past. Let us know in the comments what other historical oddities you think we should cover. Thanks for watching.